open at 14, so I'll take start off and some full crew Orion Place. So if we get a couple more minutes, all right? All right, won't be long.
I won't be filming it. I'll be sort of filming it, so we don't need the 6. You can put them away if they're. You're good, right? Right. So I'm just on 5-6. I just go preset 5-6. Are you on 5-6?
5-5.
Yeah.
We just try to balance the daylight up a bit better, Chris.
Is that
Righty ho, you want to frame up the shots? Give us a thumbs up when you're good. Done.
you want some sound? All good? Almost feel like we're family now.
Carly, you whether you want it.
Yeah.
So, everyone good?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see you all again. As you can see from the dissipation of the smoke hanging over the city, that we are without any doubt winning the battle against the fire in the convention centre. It started to do what we had kind of planned that we wanted it to do, which was to burn out the roof and stay contained with the water that we have been using over the last 20 odd hours to contain it inside the building and maintain and contain the damage to the roof and at this point in time some parts of the mezzanine. We're very comfortable with that. We also know that we've got quite some time to go yet though. The emergency is not over and won't be over till we can remove all of the risk completely and ensure there's no further risk to the citizenry or the building. And that will take some time because we still have some real challenges around entry to the building because whilst the roof is burnt, it hasn't all collapsed in. And indeed, just a couple of hours ago, we had part of the roof come in on the 5th floor and fall on one of our firefighters who has been taken off to hospital with some concussion. And I believe he is all good, but I haven't had full reports on that yet. So that is part of the reason, I guess, again, why we had been reluctant to continue to put our firefighters into the building during the main fire operation. There's about 20% of the roof left in respect to the burn. And at the rate it was burning, we're kind of thinking that by about 8 o'clock tonight, that should be consumed. And hopefully, more smoke will have dissipated by that time. Again, I'd like to just acknowledge our firefighters, both women and men, for the hard work. It's been a hard-working day, and I'm sure many of people have noticed the thick smoke that has been around the building as the day go on. It's quite difficult working in those conditions. It's been quite arduous moving in and out of the building, operating from the points of safety that is inside the building that they can. And within the next couple of hours, we will look to change those crews over and bring in fresh crews. Many, of course, who had been there last night as well, and some, of course, who were there yesterday. So we're back into this rotation of both firefighters and senior officers. I think that's about as much of an update as I can give you. This is where we are. We will continue to monitor. And I suspect, from a point of view of fire and emergency, we're going to be in attendance there in a lesser, the lighter smoke that kind of sits around the bottom. So it's, but you know, I mean, let's be honest, we're wandering around the world, and rightly so, telling people they shouldn't smoke cigarettes. So we don't want to put people into that kind of smoke if we don't have to. And you'll also notice that our firefighters had breathing apparatus, not just the main breathing apparatus, but the ARPs, which are just, they wear a mask, which gives them that filtration.
How long do you expect it to stay over the city, that smoke?
We've got a good sort of brisk wind out there, and I'm noticing it almost by the hour. It's getting less and less and less. So, you know, once the main burning dies down and the consumption of that material is gone, once that happens, it may stay a little smoggy for a few days, because there's going to be little flare-ups. You're always going to have some of that material continue to decompose as it's hot on the inside. Very, very complex piece of roofing structure. As I've said over the last couple of days, you've got a butyl layer, you've got timber, and then you've got sort of 3 layers of both glass wool and straw. And a lot of the white smoke is more than likely to be the straw. And so that's going to hang for a little bit to enable us to get in and actually get that all dampened down. It's going to take a wee while.
Earlier today, St John's said that someone had been taken from the scene to Auckland Hospital in moderate condition. Is that the firefighter you referred to?
That's the only person I know that's been taken, yes.
Are you able to give us any more information about what happened?
It was a piece of roof. It was on the 5th floor. The report I got was that it was really quite unusual. That it just sort of came off. It may well have been flicked off in the wind and come through one of the gaps in the roof and come down and took everybody by a real surprise. But it's not the sort of thing we want happening to our firefighters, and very clearly why we have been careful about the internal operations.
How many firefighters have now been working on it?
I believe there's around 80 there currently. At the height of the fire, there was around 130. The actual total number over the last 20 odd hours, I'm not really quite sure.
Just in terms of what happens to the injured person, were they inside the building on the 5th floor?
Yeah. They were inside the building, just going into one of the stairwells, I believe.
And in terms of, we spoke to your assistant earlier this morning, who said that if the fire got to the 5th floor, that would be more of a concern, because that would be breaking through to kind of another area. Is that a concern that the fire could spread if this has happened?
So I've been up on the 5th floor myself. Just a couple of hours ago, I went in and did a personal reconnaissance to make sure I had my confidence that we were well and truly over this. And I was walking around in probably about 150 millimetres of water. And so I'm pretty confident that any burning debris that's coming down is going into that 150 millimetres of water. The 5th floor looks in incredibly good shape, I have to say. My particular observations are that, yes, we have a damaged roof, the membrane of the roof itself. The structure looks reasonably intact, but I suspect that the engineers will test that, and that's their profession to determine how good that is or not.
And in terms of the detail of the partial collapse that you talked about earlier, that was something you were hoping for, or was it something
That is, well, we've been looking for that that ceiling to actually collapse in. That's what we wanted to do, yeah. Hence the reason why so when I say ceiling, sorry, the roof, we were expecting that to burn and collapse in, and it was doing exactly what we wanted it to do.
When you and I spoke yesterday, you said you expected to be on the scene for about 12 hours, and I suppose now we're about a day in. Has the burn been slower than you expected, or?
I guess two aspects to that. One is, yes, the burn has been slower, and perhaps I lacked imagination.
What can you tell us about the investigation?
I can't tell you anything about the investigation. The investigation will start at the point in time when we finish our operations and it becomes safe. There's been some early observations. That's all. Investigators start to gather information from people early on the scene, but that's it. There's nothing that can be determined from that.
Have you spoken to any of the people who were on the roof?
At the time of the fire?
Yes.
Not me personally, no.
Is there still, well, I appreciate it's probably hard for you to do this. Can you estimate the chance of the fire spreading at this point? You said obviously you're in water, it's very low. Is it sort of almost non-existent, or is there still a chance that it's dangerous?
My view is there's no chance of the fire spreading downwards at this point.
And you're confident it will be contained tonight?
I'm confident the fire is already contained. And it was always the plan, and I'm confident the fire is contained. What we have is a burnt structure, still smouldering, and in some places where there's some difficult little corners, there's still burning. And as I think I said before, up until about an hour ago, probably about 20% of the roof was still burning. And once that's done, then the fire will indeed burn itself out.
Yes, I guess you're confident it's not going to clear up, that nothing's going to.
I'm confident.
No more questions? Thanks.
Thank you all very much.
wants to take the centre speech?
Yeah, all yours. You staying there for?
You sure? Interesting. Well, afternoon, everyone. We'll move pretty quickly to questions, but just with some few introductory comments. First of all, I want to acknowledge those from Fire and Emergency who have been working under some pretty difficult conditions and circumstances to bring the fire under control and get it into the place it is now. So I really want to acknowledge the team who have been on the ground. Obviously, every fire that I've seen in the short space of time I've been in this role, I've seen has been dramatically different, and this is certainly the case with this fire. And yet, the team on the ground have been, from what I can see, incredibly professional, very, very focused on trying to do what they can to preserve the building. And obviously, we're all very grateful that thus far the focus has been on preserving safety of those who are working on the site or in and around the site. So I want to acknowledge Fire and Emergency for their fantastic work. I also want to acknowledge Fletchers and Sky City for being so open with us and sharing with us from the very moment of that the fire broke out as much information as possible. It seems clear to me that the lines of communication between all three parties on the ground have been excellent, and with us also, so I want to acknowledge that. Obviously, the first focus in this set of circumstances for everyone is safety, and so that's been the focus first and foremost. Secondary to that is longer term issues around the future availability of the International Convention Centre. We didn't turn our minds to that immediately, but obviously that is where questions will naturally flow. Today we've had a short discussion around when it might likely be that we'd have more information around the damage done inside the convention centre. We simply won't know for some time the extent of the damage. Obviously it's up to Fire and Emergency to get the building into a place where it can be re-entered. That's obviously going to take a few more days yet. From that point, we would have an expectation, once it's safe, that there'll be those who will wish to investigate what occurred here, and also engineers who will need to check the safety of the building. Assessments then will flow from there around how long it will take to do the remedial work required to get the building back on track and to completion. What I will say is, regardless of that timeline, APEC in 2021 will still be held in Auckland. There is no question there. Simply what is in question now is where it will be hosted in terms of building. With complex events like APEC, of course, as a government, you always have contingency. We have contingency. We are ready to trigger it if required. And so essentially it's a matter of waiting till we're in a position to determine which building will be hosting these meetings and events. But the question of APEC in 2021 is not in question. Otherwise, I think we're all on hand to answer any questions that you might have, and feel free to direct them to either of the parties that might be most relevant to answer them.
Prime Minister, what did you think when you came into Auckland and saw the damage and the smoke over the city?
No, certainly, it is not the city, of course, that we're all used to, busy, bustling, people moving between offices and meetings. The effect of the smoke obviously has dampened down the activity in the city, and you can see how the smoke in particular has been debilitating for people as they've moved around. But you can also see the difference that a short period of time has made. We're in a much better space than in this morning, and I expect we'll see a much bigger difference tomorrow again. But there's no doubt it's had a significant effect on the activity in the central business district.
Do you think people will start returning to the city tomorrow, or do you think people should wait?
Advice we're getting is that there'll be individual information for people depending on the buildings that they work in. So that'll be depend on proximity to the fire, but also the ability of different buildings to purge through their air conditioning systems any residual smoke. So it will be case by case. Our advice is for employees to stay in touch with their employers. They'll be giving them advice as to when they'll be operational again. It will be case by case.
And what about the economic impact, firstly, of, I guess, the fact that half the CBD's been shut down, people haven't worked, the effect that'll have on businesses and the economy?
We're, of course, mindful of the effects that are beyond the control of businesses who are, for instance, within an area within the cordon who just aren't able to operate even if they wanted to. That's actually a relatively small number of businesses. What we have asked, though, is MSD to activate what they would usually bring into force in circumstances like this. And we have experienced these kinds of situations before. Sadly, businesses caught up, for instance, in cordons around March 15th. So we do have contingency. My expectation is that those agencies will be working closely with those businesses.
So what will that be, some kind of financial support for businesses?
That's what we've had in before with very specific circumstances. Again, I'd say it'd be a very small number who would likely be affected in that way.
And then what about the wider impact on the city, on Sky City businesses, on Fletchers, and on the economy, the effect that we will have this break in construction?
I'll give a short comment and then allow each Sky City and Fletchers. Of course, the discussion I've just had with both has been the likely impact on jobs in particular. Interestingly, of course, prospects for the hotel component of the convention centre at this stage look like that may be able to continue, and of course that's a large employment component for Sky City. So that is looking like relatively positive news. Of course, then for at the rest of the impacts are relatively short term in terms of their staff being off site for the present period of time while we wait for the fire to be cleared and people to be able to return. For Fletcher's, a discussion around simply now how much longer we'll be expecting contractors to work on site. There will likely be some hiatus, but obviously they're in the short term looking after the people that they've been working with immediately. Some are likely to be working on the project a little longer than anticipated. So it'll be a different profile, but in terms of overall employment, we're hoping that the effect will be minimal. But I'll let.
No, I think you've covered the high level. In the short term, we would hope to be open and trading by Friday, if we can get the site back tomorrow afternoon, which is the indication at the moment. So current employees can expect to go back on Friday. The longer term, we were going to be looking to staff up to 800 people in the year ahead. A large component of that will still hopefully be on our payroll by virtue of being employed in the hotel. We obviously need to assess whether the hotel is capable of being open, but our intention is to have it open next year, going into summer in advance of the America's Cup, and with a bit of luck we can achieve that. So a decent number being employed there. Obviously the pure convention employees that we would have employed next year, that's the component that'll be delayed until we've got a convention centre.
And all I'd say is our technical project management staff will be very busy because we've got to work through all the, understanding the reset of the project. So they're going to be very, very busy, and we'll probably have to add to that to actually deal with the multiple streams. When you get into the subcontractors, some will be very busy as they work with us to make the building safe and then work through some of the remediation before we do the restart. Others may have a hiatus, but we're actually working very closely with them. And the other thing we're watching with our subcontract workforce is, because of the way the evacuation was so quick, some left their tools on site and things like that. So we've stood up help centres and actually are facilitating to make sure they don't have an issue with those sorts of items and that they had to leave behind. But once we get back in, we'll be able to return them to them as well. And we're actually working with all of our subcontractors now to just work out. Some of them are very busy and they can actually redeploy easily, others might not be, and we're just going to get individual plans for each contract on a case-by-case basis. But in the medium term then, there'll actually be more work because we've obviously now got to not only finish what we had to do, but rebuild a chunk as well. So more jobs in the medium term.
Minister, do you have a message for those workers whose hard work has now literally gone up in flames?
I was talking to one of our ministers who visited the convention centre not long ago, and the progress that had been made there, how far along it actually was, compared to obviously now this devastating fire, is will be hugely disappointing for all those involved. It had come so far, and to now see this major setback, of course, will be a real blow to that workforce. But I know that they'll be as committed as everyone here to seeing that restored. You can see from the outside, it has the potential to be a beautiful building. It's unique. the glass panelling, which is, as some might say, miraculously holding up against some pretty high pressure water hoses currently, I think is testament to the unique nature of the building that's being built, and now the plan has to be to restore it.
Prime Minister, this was supposed to be a one-of-a-kind facility that would hold that kind of capacity. Is it realistic for you to guarantee that APEC will still be held in New Zealand, given we don't have other facilities that were supposed to do what this building was supposed to do?
Yes.
New Zealand's down the
Yes. Yes, it is. You will recall New Zealand has hosted APEC before, and we've hosted it without an international convention centre. Of course, there is a convenience to having a facility of this nature, but with any conventional conference as complex as this one, we already had contingency in place, and that contingency remains. So regardless of whether or not the convention centre is available, APEC will proceed.
Are you concerned that some world leaders may shy away from coming, given that you have this sort of purpose-built facility now, and maybe a more piecemeal?
No, not at all. I think you'll find when leaders looking at attending APEC, they don't look at whether or not they're attending in one conference room or not. Having been to a couple of APECs now, the configurations are often quite diverse, and that's not the basis on which leaders or countries choose to attend.
If this continued for any longer or I guess wider, if economic implications were known, would the government consider widening that package for MSD or looking at further compensation or some kind of package?
At the moment, those packages are designed for situations like, for instance, as I explained, businesses caught up within cordons where they literally are unable to trade, and that then has a knock-on effect for staff. And so those are the parameters under which MSD have operated. I've no reason to believe that we have need at this point to look beyond that, but we always keep a watching brief of situations that are unique.
Is it concerning that a fire like this has brought our biggest city essentially to a halt?
Look, of course, in most circumstances, you already have a completed building that has the facilities within it, the fully operating sprinkler systems available in order to deal immediately with a situation like this. Now, granted, with the building, the convention centre, sprinkler systems were ready, available and working from level 3 and below. But for level 5, 6 and 7, that was a part of the building where they were still being installed, as you would expect for a building under construction. So that, of course, does mean that the effects of a fire can be that much more damaging, obviously. All right, thank you, everyone. What's the 3, 5? Was 3 and below, wasn't it? Oh, was it?
Good enough.